Hi, everybody. Welcome to SEAL Team 7. And today I have a very, very special guest, one of my oldest friends in the fandom, and one of the smartest people I know, M.J Gallagher. And he's not only a established author and published author, he is also an veritable expert on all things Norse, all things Greek now, all things Final Fantasy VII. So welcome, MJ. Why don't you introduce yourself just a little bit and tell us what your body of work looks like and where people can find you.
Thank you so much. Listen, I'm so delighted to be back on the show. This is one of my happy places. SEAL Team 7. I'm so grateful to be able to be invited here, but also, any conversation with you, be it 5 minutes on Discord or 3 hours on Twitch. I love it so much. I've such a fun time just having a conversation. So thank you for being there as my friend. So to anyone who is not familiar with my work, I'm M.J Gallagher. I've been a huge Final Fantasy VII fan since the 1997 release. In recent years, I have taken my personal passion in mythology and used that to sort of bring together books which look at the comparisons between both Norse mythology and Greek mythology more recently with Final Fantasy VII. It's not necessarily widespread knowledge that the lead scenario writer of the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, Kazushige Najima, is actually an enormous mythology fan himself, but more so that he actively wrote and directed games based on Greek mythology before joining Squaresoft. So there's actually a real foundation there in terms of what Final Fantasy VII has been built on, particularly through Norse mythology and Greek mythology. So the purpose of those books has really just been to point out those comparisons to those who are not familiar with them, but also just to give individuals a sort of vehicle that they can then learn about these mythologies through Final Fantasy VII in a way that, a context that they are familiar with and that they enjoy. So I've been a real sort of... I've been heavily invested in the Final Fantasy fandom for a number of years, certainly more so since Rebirth released. I've obviously been having conversations both from the mythology perspective, but just the general theology, lore side of things from the compilation. Ever since, I've produced a video series for KupoCon, which looks at the hidden details in Remake. And I've started doing the same thing for Rebirth again. So the first couple of episodes are now on KupoCon's YouTube channel, which basically points out the content that is sort of hard to, or not hard to, but easy to miss, the first couple of playthroughs, just to sort of enhance your understanding of the game or to kind of point out the fun little quirks along the way. So if you are interested in that side of things, please do check it out.
Well, yeah, I think I am. And I, own all of his books, and they're great, by the way. So, what have you been up to?
I have almost exclusively been playing Rebirth and trying to fit in the started researching. I did actually expect for it to be around the same size as the Norse mythology one, and it ended up being more than twice the size. And it's one of these things that once you start to scratch the surface and go down a few rabbit holes, you realise the extent to which Greek mythology has played a part in the overall compilation, which in hindsight that makes a lot of sense for two reasons. The first one is that Greek mythology is so voluminous,
Right.
To begin with, so there's a lot more to draw from. than perhaps there is in Norse mythology. And the second reason is that, from a career point of view, that is Nojima's bread and butter. That's
Right.
that is his go-to thing, and you find the same thing, in quite a lot of his stories, that you tend to see that if he's perhaps not sure which direction to take, he sort of relies on stories from Greek mythology a little bit, which, to be perfectly fair, is common in all media types. That's not exclusive to Final Fantasy. It's not exclusive to gaming. But it was hugely surprising to me, as someone who's already interested in that side of stuff, to kind of peel back the veil and see just the depth to which this has been implemented in the series. So, yeah, if it's something that you have an interest in, please do check out the books or my own media around the social platforms.
I agree that you should do that. Audience members, please support M.J. Gallagher. So, walking into Rebirth, the amount of Norse connections is really, really quickly apparent. It's apparent in chapter 1. And of course, we'd sort of expect the town, named after one of the realms of Yggdrasil, to be, reverent of its source material. But I was sort of shocked at the amount of fun little nods. So tell me your experience as somebody that was looking at the Norse side of things before we get into Greek or Carl Jung.
Sure. Do you mean in chapter 1 or just in general?
Start with chapter 1, but tell me your journey as a Norse guy. You're not not as a ethnicity.
Yeah. Well, I knew it was likely to be slightly more than there had been from the original game. So just for anyone who's not actually familiar with it, Nibelheim is actually based on the Norse sort of primordial world of ice and mist called Niflheim. Similarly, Midgard is based on Midgard, which is the world of men. So the idea for Nibelheim is that within the Norse myth cycle, eventually the underworld itself, individuals who die, the aim for Norsemen was to die a heroic death. That was considered the most powerful thing that you could do. The best thing that you could do with your life was to die a glorious death in battle. So half of the individuals who died a glorious death went to Odin in Valhalla, half of them went to Freya in Folkvanger, and everyone else who didn't die a glorious death just went to the underworld, Hell. And the Hell itself was actually located in Niflheim. So in Final Fantasy VII itself, there's actually a huge amount of association between Nibelheim and death. The tragedy of the town itself. Odin, who is the sort of summon of death, is located in Nibelheim. There's so much going on there that when Baby Seal first had access to the kind of really early demo and was able to sort of share publicly, the little bit of footage that you had from Nibelheim. Part of that build, they'd included the Yggdrasil armlet. Now, Yggdrasil is the world tree. So we knew from that alone that Norse mythology was likely to be considered on a even more deep level than had already been there. So I was really quite keen to see where they went with it. And then, of course, the demo dropped publicly, and arriving in Nibelheim, seeing the Nidhogg Hotel blew my mind. Nidhogg is in Norse mythology is the dragon who dwells in the sort of the underworld and basically chews on the corpses of, the really naughty people, the murderers and oathbreakers and things like that. We'd already known from Traces of Two Paths that the river running through Nibelheim is called the Gunthra, which is actually one of the rivers of the underworld in Norse mythology. So from this alone, I could deduce that, okay, we're probably going to get more and more here. And it just kept going. We got to the cave of or the ravine, of Nibelheim. In Norse mythology, the entrance to the underworld is guarded by a hellhound called Garm, pretty similar to what Cerberus is in Hades in Greek mythology. So, for me, I got really excited about this. Okay, we've actually got the entrance to the underworld in Norse mythology is referenced as you are making your way up the mountain, to arrive at Genova and everything from there that's associated with death. Not realizing that chapter 12 actually, or chapter 11, sorry, just goes for it with the Garm references itself.
Yeah.
It blew my mind that, okay, everything that I was talking about, everything I was excited about from chapter 1 really, really paid off many chapters down the line. So, that was phenomenal for me. But to then take it a step further and, to the little bits of lore that you get about Odin is really quite on the nose in terms of Norse mythology, the sort of god of death on the battlefield, or things like that. The weapon for Kate Sith that you can acquire in Nibelheim is the Gjallarhorn, which is specifically the horn that gets blown as the herald to Ragnarok. But there's a lot of fun with that because the little description for it comes with the Lady Luck ability. Now, Lady Luck, or the goddess associated with good and bad fortune in Norse mythology, is Freya, whose chariot is pulled by cats.
Amazing.
So we've actually got the connection straight to Kate Sith there.
Amazing.
So there was just it's none of this is coincidental, but this is off the back of going to the village of the Gee and seeing the Nibel Mountains and the sort of landscape in the background. So they've already up this underworld connection, and then it just gets absolutely wild when you get to the Temple of the Ancients, and some of the sort of end game weapons for certain characters are specifically lifted from Norse mythology, really, really niche stuff.
Yeah, it's very niche.
And none of that is an accident. And maybe come back to that if we get into the Temple of the Ancient stuff. But
we will.
It absolutely blew my mind that so many of the things that I've been talking about in my book years ago not only came to fruition. The things I'd speculated on appear in Rebirth, but they actually took them several stages further by actually reconstructing the Norse underworld using the names such as Garm and Nibelheim and the Gunthra and Nidhogg and
what about the big one? The big one they finally they ditched so long. What were you
sorry, yeah, no, I was getting to that one. Sorry, yeah, okay. I thought you were still talking about Nibelheim.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so a couple of months ago, I actually watched back the first time you and I ever had a proper one-to-one chat, and Sleepeasy was there. We made predictions, and that was my prediction that they would change the name of the Midgard Zolom to Midgardsorm. And I was so deflated after the Ever Crisis version came out, still saying Midgard Zolom, that Yeah, it was to actually have that not only confirmed that that's its name, but there's so many daft little references to both Midgardsormr itself and Ragnarok that's in chapter 2 as well. Like when you go to speak to Bill at the Chocobo Ranch, and when he's describing Midgardsormr, he says he's quicker than a lightning bolt. But the story of Ragnarok is that Midgardsormr is the nemesis of Thor, who's the god of thunder and lightning,
Right.
and the king of another. So there are little touches in there. But chat, like the Norse mythology stuff, yeah, absolutely blew my mind. But even chapter 2, sort of moving into that, you could start to see, like, did you pay much attention to the Titan lore and what was going on in Calm itself? So, for anyone that's actually read my book about Greek myths, it kind of talks a little bit about how the world was formed in terms of the creation story of the Titans and the Olympians fighting each other in this 10-year war, and that's they believe that this sort of seismic activity through just the sheer primordial forces is what shaped the world. So to then actually have Titan be part of the in-game lore for how the grasslands were shaped was absolutely incredible. But it kind of goes a little bit further than that. That they tie the when you kind of first start chapter 2 and you leave the inn and you can see the dancers over in the corner of the plaza, and just by they themselves don't actually talk about it, but just by listening to little conversations dotted here and there around Calm, people are talking about the Harvest Festival. And if you sort of walk around the town, you can see advertisements for whiskey and beer and wine as well. Okay. So basically, where I'm going with this is that if you were to use the word rebirth in the context of Greek mythology, what we're actually talking about there is the cycle of the seasons. The concept that the Greeks had, and other cultures as well, but the concept that the Greeks had was that for them to understand when to plant grain or when to plant different vegetables or grapes or whatnot, it went through the cycle of the seasons. So the story of why the seasons are spring into summer, then autumn into winter, is to do with Persephone and the theft of, or the kidnap of Persephone, so that she can only spend 6 months with the gods and 6 months under the earth. So the 6 months she's with the gods, that's when spring comes and summer's here, and then when she returns to the underworld, that's when everything dies again. We get to winter, and then we cycle back again. So that this is the cycle of birth, life, death, rebirth, which is really quite prevalent in there. But specifically, the festivals that were held to celebrate the harvests were the Eleusinian mysteries and also the Dionysian mysteries. But the Eleusinian mysteries was actually to do with the harvesting of crops, so that was to do with Demeter and Persephone, who was her daughter. So when we're talking about Calm and the Harvest Festival, Harvest Festival is tied to Titan, who is then tied to the Greek mythology that's implemented in it. So already if you're talking about Greek mythology and rebirth, we have the Harvest Festival, the actual Harvest Festival, that is the big thing the Greeks celebrated for rebirth. Similarly, later on when Dionysus was celebrated, both as a figure of conquering death. So it was still not quite the rebirth side of things, but the conquering death side of things. It was all about the harvesting of grapes to make wine, which is why you see so many references to wine, and particularly in the Rusty Arrow, wine making as well. So there's actually a lot of mythology that's just hidden in plain sight around there, and it gets even better where one of the names for Demeter is Chloe. So we've also like Chloe, who's dealing with the death of her parents and the rearing of birds and all this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a continuation of life and death and whatnot, and it doesn't actually. The mythology is sort of just simmering beneath the surface.
It is, yeah. It's at every level and on from multiple schools of thought. I thought one of the most striking visuals was to see Gold Saucer during the daytime and see the the ashen look, that Yggdrasil has. Gold Saucer itself is structured like the world tree. And trees of life seem to be really essential to the idea of Final Fantasy VII. Sephiroth is the Sephirotic tree of life, and then there's a bunch of Yggdrasil references throughout too.
There's a lot. I've got a lot to say about trees in this one.
I bet you do. I bet you do. Something that I've always sort of pitched to Mo behind the scenes is that one of the things that I felt was maybe strong and intentional commentary that nobody's ever really come out and confirmed, nor do I think they would, is the idea that there is a sense of colonialism attached to the way that Genova operates. That Genova represents these or is represented by these very Judeo-Christian titles and references. Genova itself being like a portmanteau of Jehovah and Nova, so there's sort of this the direct takeaway would be that it means new God, but in a as a perversion of the tetragrammaton, which is which most people would read as Yahweh, but somebody mistranslated it years ago and now it's Jehovah. But that's an aside. But the idea that you have these classical belief sets that are affiliated with the Cetra in particular, and that there's this idea that there's a perversion and takeover from Christendom, which did happen in real life to the Norse faith. It was almost entirely eliminated by Christian expansion, and that's not me making a statement about the accuracy or morality of any of that. That's just a statement of historical fact. And I always thought that perhaps there was a parallel there, and so the idea that Yggdrasil and the world tree has been corrupted by and sort of ultimately with the goal of replacement of this other tree of life, the Sephirotic tree of life, has always seemed significant to me. And although there's always been connections to the old world of Final Fantasy VII and classic myths, I do think that this game, Rebirth in particular, really makes an effort to very specifically connect Norse myths to the Cetra. And we do see that a lot in the Temple of the Ancients in particular. Like you mentioned, some of those weapon names are really, really niche. but also like sort of a representation of their society. And one of the things that struck me about all of the Temple of the Ancients weapons is that all the descriptions would say, "Hey, these are Cetran," but if you looked at them, they do not match what our idea of what Cetran technology looks like up to this point. In fact, it's almost like the most technologically advanced. It's like borderline Mako punk, like particularly the slipstream saber. These look like very sophisticated pieces of technology, and to sort of see like the Temple of the Ancients as proof that we have a lot to learn about Cetran society and their downfall is really interesting. What were some of your I want to hear your thoughts of specifically Temple of the Ancients.
Sure. I in terms of the mythology side of things, one of the first, and I wasn't expecting this at all. One of the first pieces of iconography that you see as you enter is the tree, particularly the kind of upside down tree with the roots and the what is supposed to be the canopy sort of touching from different angles. I don't think that's an accident. And the reason I don't think it's an accident is that when we talk about Yggdrasil as the world tree, many cultures have a fairly linear myth cycle. Some of them talk about creation myth, some of them talk about an apocalypse. Some of them don't talk about an end of days at all. For example, Greek mythology doesn't really have an end. One of the mythologies that has the most famous apocalyptic story is Norse mythology, in Ragnarok. But what's really specific about Ragnarok is that it's not an end, it's a rebirth. Because the actual the way that Ragnarok is told is it's a prophecy, and the prophecy ends with the world tree being burned and the world sinking into the sea, only to be reborn as these sort of fresh lands where a handful of the gods will return, and two of the sort of chosen humans, the pure humans that had hidden within the tree, will then re-emerge and in a kind of Adam and Eve type way. So I don't think it's a coincidence that so much weight is placed on Norse mythology within Rebirth. I also don't think it's a coincidence that so much tree iconography is placed in the Temple of the Ancients. And I think from my understanding and how I view the way that the worlds have diverged and are converging within Rebirth, is actually connected to that. And I think one of the reasons that the Norse weapons within the Temple of the Ancients are present is just on a surface level, it kind of looks cool. Like, for example, when you get it was Yarn Grieper.
Yeah.
That's Yarn Grieper are the gloves or the iron greaves of Thor, but you pick them out of the chest at the point where you're kind of in the middle of that like storm of the live stream, so you're kind of battling your way, with the live streams sort of cutting about everywhere, and it's almost like the whirlwind maze that you have to stop and run through the gusts and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's a coincidence that it's connected to storms, basically. The collar that you get for Red 13 is Brisingamen, which is again specific to the goddess Freya, who, like Odin, is actually a goddess of death. There's also one of the most famous stories of Brisingamen is not only how it was acquired, but also that it gets loaned to Thor during the story where he has to dress up to get his hammer back. So within the actual my Norse myths book, I've sort of paralleled that story with the Honeybee Inn scenario, or the Wall Market scenario where Cloud has to dress up to get Tifa back. So the most important one for me is actually Gambantine, which is the staff that you get for Aerith. Now, this is so niche and so specific that I had to look it up because I didn't know off the top of my head what this was a reference to.
I mean, I vaguely remember it being a sword.
So, I think there are two different. The name appears in two different stories. The first story is to do with when the god Frey, who's a nature god and the twin brother of Freya, he wishes to marry a giantess, but rather than going and proposing himself, he sends his servant Skirnir. But what Skirnir does is it basically blackmails the goddess into marrying Frey, and one of the threats that he makes is to use this sword. But that's not necessarily what it's in connection to. It's actually to do with the second story, and the second story is to do with a figure called Harbard. Now, anyone who's played Final Fantasy 16 might recognise the name Harbard. Okay, so will we do a wee spoiler thing for 16, or has it been long enough that we could?
It's way spoilers. Go for it.
Okay, cool. So, in the story of Harbard, basically, Thor is he's been out hunting giants as he does in Jotunheim, in the world of giants, and he's looking to get back to Asgard, the world of the gods. But the river between the two has overflown, and on the other side is this figure called Harbard. But Harbard won't let Thor cross, so the poem that this comes from is basically them just arguing and insulting each other. Okay? But it's been theorised by most scholars that Harbard is actually just Odin in disguise. Odin is very, very often wandering the worlds in disguise and gets himself into all sorts of bother as a result of it. And one of the reasons for this is that, during certain texts, there is a list of names provided for Odin, one of which is Harbard. The reason that this is important is that in Final Fantasy 16, the reason that Sleipnir is from House Harbard is that Harbard is a disguise of Odin. So Sleipnir Harbard, is actually just a extension of Odin,
right?
The creation of Odin, right? So that's where that name comes from in the context of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Odin is the god of death, right? And we're already approaching this scenario where, we're getting close to what's going to happen at the Forgotten Capital. We've already got death in our mind. Obviously, the ability associated with Gambantine is the noble sacrifice, or I can't remember exactly what it's called, but it's to do with
noble
death.
Sacrifice.
But more specifically,
yeah.
But more specifically, there is a reference earlier in the game to Greek mythology and how the transfer of one world to the next, particularly into the world of death, occurs in Greek mythology. And it's when you go to the village of the Gi, and the Gian attack takes you on a boat and takes you into the village of the Gi on a ferry or in a boat. Okay, so it's a direct reference to Greek mythology and Charon carrying the souls of the dead into the underworld. Harbard is the ferryman. So we have a staff directly associated with the ferryman.
They could have done independent of that and sort of are. So, like, let's say that at the beginning of the game, Aerith or at the end of Remake, Aerith, transported Zack into, a temporary live stream world. Well, at the end, it seems like he's out of it, so she could have easily just not used the mechanic of that and just transported him to somewhere else if the writers dictated that. So I don't think the mechanical purpose of these live stream worlds or these multiple worlds has ever been to change or alter fate. It's always been a canvas to explore character relationships. And I do think that the payoff for those has been, slow, but I feel like we finally got it at the, beginning of chapter 14 with, that whole Aerith scene and even Zack's sort of resolve to kind of, not be a bully of fate anymore. Before he says the cheesiest shit you've ever heard and jumps off of a cliff, see you never, or, smell you later, whatever. Whatever he said, despite all that, I think that those are the...
I think it's see you later, crocodile, is what it says.
That's exactly what he says. I think that's the purpose of these scenes, regardless of their nature, and their physicality. Whether they have an impact on like the rest of the story is sort of, it's kind of not the point of them at all, because all of the things that you could accomplish with quote unquote the multiverse, they could do without it. So the multiverse itself has to have a separate purpose to justify it, and in my mind so far it does, and I think it will continue to have the same overall purpose, which is to explore spaces, conversations that don't fit anywhere else, in a way that doesn't necessarily assail the coherence of the main narrative. I also do think it's kind of specifically interesting that we never see like Harrier Gongaga or or Chihuahua Gold Saucer. We just see, especially now because they patched out the mistakes.
I was going to say we did see Terrier Gold Saucer, but
they patched that out.
Yeah, so I was kind of hoping they would leave it in as basically as an allusion to Cloud being sensitive to overlapping worlds. But obviously that wasn't the purpose of it. I actually have a very different theory.
I want to hear it. I do want to address something that popped up, which is that I think whether or not there are worlds within Livestream or literal multiverse is almost irrelevant. There's still this is from Night Sky Prince. There are multiple threads and series of events, and with multiple versions of characters and items, like the white materia. Its narratively will ultimately function like a multiverse either way. I disagree pretty aggressively with both the read of that and the statement, but I'll let you answer first.
Okay. I also disagree with it. I disagree. I appreciate what you're saying, and it could simply be a case that what they have done here is use the branching worlds exactly as you said as a sort of narrative tool to bring characters together that might not have otherwise had that opportunity. I personally think it goes a lot deeper than that, and I'm going to circle back to your original question, right?
Okay, go on.
To explain why I think this is the case. So I think the reason that the Zack storyline exists is to do with the ending to Rebirth. It might not necessarily have originally been there. And the reason that I think that is the way that chapter 14 plays out is obviously for the duration of the story, Aerith's materia has been clear to indicate that the Whispers have removed the Cetran memories or the Cetran knowledge that was within the white materia, and now she does not have the power to summon Holy. So the whole point of chapter 14 is how does Aerith get the white materia back? So I think what's happened is that way back when the creators use your words more, Jesus. The creators have made the determination that everyone is going to think either Aerith lives or Aerith dies. So what they've done is subverted both expectations by doing both. But what I think most of us who have played the original game, played the compilation, our understanding of it is that in order for the world to be saved at the end of the original Final Fantasy VII, Aerith had to die. So what happens in the scenario where Aerith is actually saved, but already knows that she has to die? We have to find a situation where, how do we cycle back to that? And I think what's actually going on is that the Aerith that appears at the start of chapter 14 is the saved Aerith. Because the Aerith at the altar had the white materia. So in the non-rainbow haze, oh by the way, the rainbow bridge is another one. The rainbow bridge is the bridge between the world of life and the world of death. Or not world of death, but you know what I mean. So specifically using a rainbow haze is really quite
Norse myth, yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we've got two directions we go. In the world where Aerith dies, the white materia obviously falls into the pool. In the world where Aerith lives, the white materia is still in her possession. But I think one of the reasons that they specifically have a conversation between Zack and Biggs to say that they don't really remember how they got there. They can't really, their internal body clock is all over the place. I think it's to establish that time is not quite moving the same way. And one of the things that the Ultimania, or the creators said in Ultimania, is try not to think about this as parallel worlds.
Right.
There are separate worlds, but not necessarily parallel worlds. And what that reads to me is that these are not moving parallel chronologically. So it introduces the idea of that time
being in a loop
is more of an abstract concept.
Yeah.
So I think what's happened here is that the Aerith at the start of chapter 14 is actually the Aerith that Cloud saved at the end of chapter 14. But she knows that she has to die. She also knows that Aerith at the start of chapter 14 in the Sleeping Forest didn't have the white materia. So a time loop has been created where the saved Aerith has to give the white materia back to the Aerith before the altar. The cloud that appears in that dream, or the homeward bound, and I actually think the use of the term dream here is a deliberately ambiguous, because it does create for us this idea of, okay, well, if it's a dream, it's not real, but also the dream might be the last date. So when she's talking about her dream, it might actually be she wants to go on one last date with Cloud. But the Cloud that appears physically with her in that is either the Cloud, the corporeal Cloud from the world in which he saved her, or alternatively, in an even crazier way, remember the reference right at the start of the game where you see all the party members getting loaded onto the helicopters, but Cloud is missing. The actual physical Cloud is missing.
Mm-hmm.
Going on the assumption that the Aerith in the livestream has the capacity to transfer the physical white materia between worlds, potentially she also has the capacity to transfer physical bodies between worlds, and therefore arguably could have done that with the Cloud at the beginning. But a more sensible rationale would be that it's just the Cloud that saved. So there's one consciousness. Cloud in the world where Aerith died is the main consciousness, but there's also this Cloud and Aerith in the saved timeline. So I think that creates a time loop there. But in order to then justify the use of the time loop and the explanation of how the time loop exists. They have to establish how that works within the rest of the story. So I think what Zach's actual, or one of the main reasons here, and one of the main reasons that Biggs is there, and I don't disagree that all of them are connected to Aerith, and that's pretty clear. I also think that, or the reason that it's all set in Sector 5 is just to keep it self-contained. I don't think it's only because that's where Aerith's memories are. I think it's just to make the narrative a bit more simple to follow, and because the characters do all know each other, they can have that wee set of interactions together. By introducing Biggs, but you have the really important one with Zach's timeline going off, and then you introduce Biggs, which then means that you can get a sub branch of Zach's timeline, where he's, the whole thing at the end where he goes to the Shinra building, or he goes to save Biggs, or he ends up sitting on the chair, not the chair, sorry, the steps, right? So I'm going to do something here, and this is a first that I've ever done live, right? I'm going to illustrate what I mean, right?
Okay.
For you and for chat, right? So this is our main timeline.
Okay, we're getting pictures.
We're getting pictures, very, very basic pictures, so I apologise to all the artists out there, right? So to go back to what Night Sky Prince was saying, I don't think there are necessarily an infinite number of worlds in a multiverse. Sephiroth specifically says that new worlds are created when the barriers of fate are breached. So I think there is, arguably it could be infinite number of worlds, but we're looking at specific instances that occur within the main timeline. So the first big one that crops up is Zack. Okay, so there's the main timeline that continues on, and there's the Zack death that shoots off, right? So within the Zack the Terrier timeline, we get to the point where he's in the tunnel and he's looking at the Terrier stamp and he says, right, I'm going to the Shinra HQ, and then we get the big blinding flash of rainbow stuff coming out the other tunnel, which denotes that, okay, this is no longer the Biggs branch. But obviously we're shown what happens had he chosen that. So you end up in the Pug timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Or alternatively, if he'd chosen something else, you end up in the Corgi timeline. So again, we've got main timeline, Zack branches off with the Terrier. We've got one branch away to the side for the Pug, another branch
Gotcha.
Right? So that's the Zack timeline that we know about. Okay, so that's one barrier of fate that has occurred. Okay, so if you apply the same principle to, maybe 3 or 4 other important events that have happened during the course of the main timeline, right? And we know as well that Sephiroth talks about some of these are really brief, and they only have a short lifespan. So looking at the Terrier timeline, for example, it's quite a strong branch that comes off. Then we go to the Biggs Pug one, where it's maybe a shorter branch because he gets shot straight away. Okay. So that's the type of world that Sephiroth is talking about, where it's not as long, it doesn't exist as long as it could. Okay, so do you see what I'm talking about here, where we go off in the Terrier timeline? We've got Pug, we've got Corgi, and maybe we've got a couple of other things that have happened along the way, right?
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah.
What does that look like to you?
It looks like the vein structure.
To me, it looks like the tree icons all over the Temple of the Ancients. The ash tree. No? Okay.
No, it looks like a tree. It looks like the Tree of Life stream, for sure.
Okay, so when I'm talking about we have lots of trees,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I think
Uh-huh.
what's happening here is the absolutely the connection between Sephiroth and the Sephiroth Tree of Life. They could not have been clearer about the importance of Yggdrasil. They could not have been clearer about the importance of the ash trees. Exactly as you mentioned, that's exactly how the structure of the gold saucer appears. Not only that, but within the gold saucer you've got Park Central, but after that it's also split into two sides. So I think you've got the fantasy side, you've got the entertainment side, so it's actually talking about a duality at points. On top of that, you've got all the the transmutable items. So much of it is different types of tree bark. The leaf house, for example, that Biggs wakes up in. The structure when you go way back to the Edge of Creation at the end of Remake, when you've got the universe that's dying and the universe that's being born, the black within the red nebula has a similar structure. So I think what they're trying to do is show us that the branches themselves resemble that tree. So when Sephiroth is talking about some of these branches are larger, they go on for longer, that, you know, we're talking about they're all getting trimmed. So when he's talking about the convergence or confluence of worlds, he's actually trying to trim the branches. He's trying to get everything back into the main trunk again.
Okay.
So taking that idea and applying it to Norse mythology.
Okay.
So what happens when you get to the end of the cycle? So like we talked about earlier, rebirth in Greek mythology, we're talking about cycles, we're talking about, you know, spring, summer, fall, winter. It goes round and round and round and round. But eventually the world's going to end. We know that the world's going to end. Therefore, even the cycles contained within the world, even the cycles contained within the live stream, at some point has to end. So when you apply that to Norse mythology, specifically to the Ragnarok tale, you get a situation where the universe is destroyed, the world tree is destroyed, but it's not obliterated and ceases to exist. It sinks into the water and it's then reborn. So, ending of part 3, I think we're talking about an apocalyptic event. Either they come to the realization that in order to save the planet, in order to have the good ending, they have to destroy the planet. They have to allow Meteor to happen. Because as long as Genova survives, the planet will never be saved. So the only way to do that, exactly as the Gi have talked about in the village of the Gi, the only way for them to cease to exist is to destroy the planet through Meteor. The only way to do that with Genova is to destroy the planet, only for it to be reborn exactly as what Sephiroth talks about at the end of Remake. That's a bit too dark, and I don't think they're actually going to do that. What I do think they might do, though, is use the same idea about worlds branching to allow the reunion to take place so that Genova is fully reformed. And then and only then can they defeat Sephiroth, open up a new world, put Genova in the new world and allow that one to be destroyed. The problem with that is that Zack and Cloud have Genova cells in them. So the sacrifice at World's End becomes Cloud and Zack taking Genova and whatever remains of Sephiroth into the world that's about to die, and everybody else lives a happy wee life.
Okay.
And I got all of that from trees.
Okay. Okay. Um. So let's see. Um. My issue with that is that it sort of subverts the crux of Final Fantasy VII in my mind, which is about
Okay.
Cloud's identity, his journey, and messaging would be, I think, really bad, because if the if the concept of embracing your true self and you know uh, overcoming mental health struggles and concerns is that at the end of the day you die. I'm not sure that that's the best messaging. Um,
That's true, and I don't disagree with that. And quite frankly, I hope that's not what happens. The only counterpoint I would make to that is Cloud regaining his identity and coming to terms with the loss of Aerith and understanding exactly what happened allows him to then make a choice at the end.
okay, okay,
I think that would be the get around to the point that you've made. But I also agree that it, they would have to find a very clear and um, a powerful way, I guess, to get across the message of this whole story has been about loss. This whole story has been about how individuals deal with grief. So what do you do when you're presented with the choice is either you have to sacrifice yourself or the entire planet has to sacrifice itself and deal with loss on a global scale. So I don't think it's totally inconsistent with the theme of the game, but I do also agree that they probably won't do it because that's not a marketable
it's
ending.
it's not just that it's not marketable and that it doesn't sends the wrong message. I do think it fundamentally undercuts the journey a little bit, and um and and like kind of one of the ways that the original story was subversive, it then would replace with the ending of the last two mainline Final Fantasy titles, which has now become a trope. So I would rather it stay with an old subversion than a new trope, right? So it feels like, just from a critical stance, but also it feels
Mhm.
like too much has been set up to counter this. Like, it feels like Aerith's endgame here involves saving Cloud. That's one of the things that she says. This isn't just about saving. This isn't about me. When she hands over the white materia, this isn't about me. It's about saving the world and you. And
I
there's
totally agree.
there's several times actually where Aerith makes a point saying this won't happen to you, regarding him turning into a robe. He says that right after Roche turns into a robe. Aerith like looks him in the eyes and makes that promise. It feels like Aerith's endgame is around separating this curse that Cloud has and his attachment to Sephiroth. Seems like that's very thematically connected.
Yeah.
Also, too, I think that one of the things that's kind of been overlooked in a lot of conversations, I haven't even brought it up in any conversations about Rebirth, is the only optional scene, the only secret scene in Remake was with Chadley describing Cloud as having infinite potential, something that allows him to break the bonds of his program. And I do think that there's something to that here. So I definitely see where there's a lot of DNA attached to, Sephiroth's cells being needing to be purged from the world somehow,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
else he'll continue to come back. Like, I definitely see that as a thing that's been, I think, maybe too overtly teased to the point where its plausibility would be disappointing if it were executed upon. Like, to me, that seems like the proper use of a red herring, which the entire fandom has lost the meaning of, by the way. Sorry, fandom, but learn what that means. So I get what you're saying, though, and I also want to kind of cycle back to what you said about the idea of the Aerith that you save being, sort of the character out of joint that is coming back and fixing everything. Like, sort of if you've watched X-Men or are familiar with X-Men, Aerith is Cable, essentially. The one that's going through the loops trying to fix everything, and I don't hate that. I don't hate that. I like it a lot, actually.
Just to be clear though, what I'm talking about, she's stuck in a time loop. I mean that she's actually, this is a living Aerith that's in the time loop, separate to livestream Aerith.
I get it.
Yeah, okay.
I get it. I get what you're saying, and I don't hate that. I do think that we're kind of starting to blend. I think that we've never really got any kind of actual proof that the nature of these worlds allows for copies of people. Like, I think they've made a point to never reveal whether Cloud A can talk to Cloud B, whereas...
yeah, but the difference there is that Aerith in Remake seems to be communicating with Aerith from the livestream. So if that can happen in Remake, you would then have to, or you could then put forward the argument that the living Aerith in the other world can also communicate with livestream Aerith. And if I actually don't think there are multiple livestreams. I think there's one livestream across all the worlds, except the vast majority of it is centralized around the main world, and there's only small strands that appear elsewhere.
Okay.
But
okay.
I think from the Temple of the Ancients onward, and I actually agree with Sector 6 about that, when Aerith kneels down and says finally outside the Temple of the Ancients, I do actually agree that that's her being reconnected with livestream Aerith. And we already know that within the dream sequence, there's the flowers are in full bloom at the church, meaning that there is at least one place within that world where living Aerith can communicate with livestream Aerith. And I think one of the things that support that there's limited livestream in the other worlds is that when...
Well, it says that. It says the livestream's almost run out.
It says the livestream's almost run out, but also during the sequence where they're on the boat going to the village of the Gee, Aerith puts her hand in the water and senses the other world, but she doesn't sense livestream Aerith. Meaning that livestream Aerith might not be present in the other world that she sensed. And the only reason that would be the case is that there is limited livestream or no livestream on the other world.
Okay.
So, you would have to kind of go and look for pieces of evidence to sort of back up. So I realise it's a wild theory based on trees, but I love it.
I love it. The only reason I'm trying to poke holes in it is because I think it'll help you build the theory. For instance, and to bring up the white materia, people are talking about how that's kind of some physical proof that physical things are transferring between the interlude world and the real world. But to be clear, materia is made of live stream. And what we do see is that Cloud in this white space version of the Sleeping Forest, not in a mechanically sound version, hands Aerith, who is clearly not anywhere physically around, this full piece of materia. A rainbow effect comes off of her, as if it's transferring via Bifrost from the world of death to the world of the living, and then hands it back empty. So I do think that indicates that time sort of runs out of joint, which is another thing that I think maybe wasn't conveyed in direct language the way that it was in Japanese.
And that includes Aerith. So, and this is what, or one of the reasons I think it really strongly supports that Aerith had to die, knew she had to die at the Forgotten Capital. That both the Black Whispers and the White Whispers are trying to stop Cloud killing Aerith, and only when it gets close enough, the Black ones then try to get Cloud to kill her. Or sorry, say that they were both trying to get Cloud to stop Cloud saving Aerith, and then the Black ones tried to get him to kill her. So the difference between the two, both of them want Aerith dead, but the difference is that the Black ones wanted Cloud to do it, which then is that they are trying to sort of break his psyche. So my interpretation is that they are working on behalf of the collective consciousness of the Cetra, the Livestream, the planet, Minerva. I actually think they're one and the same in terms of what their agenda is for moving forward and you know, the survival of the planet, the eradication of Genova, the eradication of the Gi potentially as well. I think that's what they are striving towards, and as we know, that if we're dealing with the collective consciousness of the Cetra, who are working within the sort of the live stream itself, and we're effectively going back to the memories of the future situation. They are conscious of the direction that we are traveling in, and they know what's coming, and they're trying to steer us that way.
Yeah. I'm close. I think they're just Aerith, personally. I think it's what Holy does. I think the mechanics of both the materia have been escalated to be allow more storytelling potential. And I think it's the robed appearance of the Whispers does not seem like a coincidence to me. It seems like they've always meant to be representative of Sephiroth's influence on the live stream. And the fact that they stay robed and are instead white seems like the holy materia was a response, right? Like what it does is it purifies those, and I think that itself is kind of a really beautiful metaphor for what I consider to be the crux of Final Fantasy VII, which is the purification of a robed guy.
That makes sense, and the forgiveness that Aerith talks about at the Temple of the Ancients. Also, in terms of the mythology aspect, and obviously we've spoken before about the Whispers in Final Fantasy VII Remake, having similarities to the Fates within classical mythology. Particularly, the German translation calls them Daimoiren, which is just the Moirai, which is the actual Greek names.
Greek fates,
But it's actually more common in Greek mythology for them to be robed in white than it is to be robed in black.
Interesting.
So it actually is depicting them this way is actually even closer to the mythology than it originally was.
I like it. That's interesting. So final shot that Zach is in. What's going on?
Well,
Flowers are blooming.
just before that, where do you think he is in his final battle?
I think they're all in Cloud's mind right there.
I, he's definitely in somebody's mind.
Oh,
And
you
the
mean the church battle?
Yeah, the church battle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's his mind.
I agree. I think that's
Yeah.
his mind, and the reason I think it's his mind is that the opening shot of it is him standing in the flower bed with
Yeah.
blackness all around, which is basically just the DMW of Healing Wind in Crisis Core, albeit with the flowers that are dead, and then obviously the battle begins by him being healed as well. So I agree. It seems to be his edge of creation, his own personal edge of creation. I think what that then means is that the Zack that's being shoved around through the space between worlds, appearing in Cloud's mind, appearing in his own mind, suggests that it's actually his consciousness that is travelling around. But I do think it is Zack, physical, alive Zack, that is present at the end of Rebirth. Can't really say which world he's in, simply because his
they really want to make sure you don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. And they've already, like, one of the reasons for that is the first thing I looked at is whether or not the flowers were blooming. But we actually see the flowers blooming in what do you call it? The Dream Aerith world, the Chihuahua world. So we know of at least one
Corgi
space.
world.
Well, is the Chihuahua one not where they end up? In the church.
They actually make a point of not letting us know whether or not that's where they are. Like the chart actually says we can't see a dog there. We don't know.
Okay.
I'm of the mind that, it doesn't really matter. Like, I don't know. I don't think the dogs are as concrete of a timestamp. I think they're more perceptual based.
A pun or a timestamp?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually agree. I don't actually think it matters which world he's in. Only that he is alive in one of the worlds.
Yeah. My gut is that he's just straight up in the real world. I don't know why. That's just my gut. But I would never like bet good money on that.
Yeah. I think he will probably end up in the real world at one point as part of the reunion of Genova. But whether or not he's already there or not is up for debate, I guess.
Sure. So, we've talked about the Ultimania a little bit, and we've got a lot more to talk about, a ton more, but we don't have the time to talk about all of it. We're gonna shoot, for about 45-ish or so more minutes, but I know that you've at least been kind of keeping up to the most that's available to us of the Rebirth Ultimania. And, other than some things that really, make, check all of the PR boxes that you would expect from an Ultimania, like, oh, it's definitely going to, be the same, but also different in indeterminate ways that you can use to keep yourself attached to the project or hope of your head coming through type thing. Like, all of those PR statements are in there, and there's the one quote from Nomura that sort of says that, at least thematically, the purpose of the depiction of Aerith's death being as confusing as it was to let us know what real loss feels like, which does feel like it can certainly be interpreted as, of the many possibilities or how to interpret that ending. It does seem to eliminate like a good third of them, at least. If you read that literally.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's pretty hard to assume that a mystery box anthology like this is ever going to like definitively answer mystery questions that can affect the sale of its final part. So I do try not to take that stuff too seriously. But there was a really interesting statement from Nojima, which I know he did because he's on Twitter and he watches what we do, and he knows that like, hey, let's just throw this weird thing, where he talks about two schools of thought that can potentially let us know how the project will conclude. He didn't just say like, oh, if you want to understand what's happening. He said, this is how, if you want to know how the story will wrap up, these are two concepts that it would help you to be familiar with. And the two concepts were the collective unconscious, which is the basis for a lot of idealism. The collective unconscious is something from, Mr. Carl Jung. I'm going to say it that way, upset people that are watching that know me. And the other is Yogacara, which is the Yogacaran view. It's like one of two massive schools of thought in Buddhism, and it's like if you were to, I don't know how many people have really deeply tried to grasp consciousness as a concept in Buddhism, but it's one of two very distinct ways to look at thought consciousness and the nature of the universe and epistemology in Buddhism. I'm sure as soon as that quote was published, people started Googling that. And what I'll say is that if you just, before we get into anything, if you just like Google those terms and read the summaries of them, it points to a very specific interpretation of things, but I implore all of you to study those things deeply. And what that will empower you to know is that both of these fields of thought are so broad that whatever your headcanon is, I promise you can find justification in either of these things. So I'm not saying that it isn't worth exploring, and I want to hear your exploration of these things. But just, I think a fair scholarly warning to the crowd is that these are massive categories of philosophical thought that don't necessarily jive perfectly. Like from a pure functional set, like collective unconscious is a branch of idealism, and Yogacara is almost rejects metaphysical idealism. So it's very, they don't necessarily even jive. So you're really just hoping that you can take, one of many components of these two component heavy schools of thought and then combine them together in a way that is going to wrap up a mystery box story, So anyways, do you have any like a passing understanding of like, say, collective unconscious?
I have a much better understanding of the collective unconscious than I do of Yogacara. I'm really not familiar with that at all. So if you have thoughts about Yogacara and how it applies to VII moving forward or even now, I am all ears.
Okay. You can cover collective unconscious.
Okay.
So let's teach the viewers what does collective unconsciousness mean in regards to the world system of Final Fantasy VII in your mind? What are ways that it could apply?
Okay, so the collective unconscious in terms of Jungian psychoanalysis is
Jungian.
That's what I said. The and Baby Seal can correct me if I'm wrong about this. There are effectively three kind of states. States are maybe not the right word, but the first state of identity is the conscious self, where you are conscious of how you are behaving, you're conscious of how you are acting, to the extent where you're putting on a mask in a way that how others want, or how you feel that others want to perceive you, or how you want others to perceive you. The second stage is the shadow, and the shadow is the part of yourself that, you know, the dark part, the one that you don't necessarily want others to see, but it's subconscious. So you are, you know, at times actively suppressing that. And what the idea behind Carl Jung's teachings is that in order to improve yourself, you should embrace or work on your shadow. You should accept that it's part of who you are, so that you can become more whole. The third stage is the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious is the part of you that is almost instinctive, but on a level where it's not something that is learned, and particularly it's something that almost all individuals possess across cultures, across geography. You know, something like if there's a bang behind you, you immediately, you know, put your hands to your head to sort of protect yourself. Nobody ever teaches you to do that. That's something that you will just do, and that's across the board. You know, another instance might be maternal instincts. You know, there's obviously a crossover with the chemistry in a female's body, but there's also psychological elements to it. The same way that a man might be pre-programmed to be the hunter-gatherer type thing. So the collective unconscious is effectively shared experiences across cultures, generations, geography, where we possess the same character traits. So is that too far away from the truth, or have I kind of
so archetypes, Jungian archetypes are impossible to avoid in the conversation about collective unconscious, but the collective unconscious is just specifically mechanically like the phylogenetic unconscious, meaning that there is a physiological method by which memes instinctually propagate the species. And what's interesting about this is that you and I have talked about comparative philosophy a lot, and comparative mythology, because I really enjoy comparative mythology and particularly like Final Fantasy and fantasy games that employ different mythologies, and see all of the social reverberations of things like cosmic duologies, like things we've talked about, like the relationship between Behemoth, Bahamut, Leviathan, and Tiamat, and how those all are really the same thing, or the same two things, and how there's these similarities that are usually just as a result of idea telephone, these memetics that sort of change form as they progress from culture to culture, but Jung saw similarities in in storytelling and myths, and thought that it was an indicator of some kind of collective phylogenetic unconsciousness, right? So like there's this a mechanical thing at play within our own, human structure that that made similarities in storytelling be a emergent property of our own physiology. And so that's kind of the idea. And so for me, like I think about the live stream, comes to play as and also there was this very like kind of throwaway not throwaway, it was for a long time was all we had, explaining where humans came from and their relationship to the Cetra. We only have one real description of that, and it's in the OG, and it sort of indicates that the difference between humanity and the Cetra was optional. Like it was a choice made by humans to not be Cetra. Like there's no no mechanical difference between them. But we do know that like in Remake, Hojo does clarify enough of a physical distinction between a pure-blooded Cetra and a regular human that he can see it on a physical level, with all of his weird, creepy part cataloging of Afalna. So that indicates sort of this kind of idea that, maybe physiologically there's this connection to the live stream that's significant and valid. That was some of the stuff that I took away from it. Archetypes, Jungian archetypes, is so like it's again one of those things that's so ubiquitous in Japanese media that depicts westernized culture that you just generally can assume that it's going to be referenced in some way. And so to me, he made a point to describe collective unconsciousness, one, because so he didn't seem like, the persona guys over there, or your standard, just average, Japanese writer taking Jung's ideas and putting them into the near game. Like I'm not no Yoko Taro. That's a Najima thing. Not really. I don't think he would disrespect Yoko Taro like that or Taro. But I think that he did make a point to say, hey, yes, archetypes, sure, but this is a specific concept that contains a necessary understanding of archetypes, but as like a physical entity, phylogenetic unconscious or collective unconscious is what he made a choice to specify. Whereas with Yogacara is like a whole thought school about, it literally means yoga user or yoga person that does yoga, like as an art, right? And so we have an idea of what that means, but in Buddhism, it means like sort of the way that consciousness dictates reality, in a broad sense. And so to me, what it feels like my read of that is, okay, Cloud's mind is definitely going to be the focal point of Part 3's story, right? It's the climax of the OG story happens in Cloud's mind, which is also called the life stream sequence. But being in the life stream is now has so many like variants in how it manifests and how we see it that's almost like not a meaningful term anymore. So Cloud's mind is more the way to describe that. And I think in the chat with Sector 6 I mentioned this, but the yellow line across these spaces does seem to come directly from the Cloud's mind sequence. It's also dripping with rainbow stuff from the big yellow line. You can see prismatics and I think it's dangerous to kind of overread into the rainbow iconography, because there's sometimes where it's really clear, like, hey, this is a big rainbow thing you're supposed to look at. Sometimes it's also just lens flare, you know. So I don't always want to, like, I did I did the thing that I always do, and I catalog visual effects, and I have a list of maybes on rainbow effects in Rebirth, and there's like 43 maybes, and that's one of them. In terms of that's a maybe rainbow. And also some of them got deleted in patches and then re-added. It's the whole thing, but like there's some real clear ones, like, yeah, that's a rainbow. That's supposed to mean stuff like that. And I was wondering if you were going to bring up the Bifrost effect, because it's something I haven't said yet. I've been kind of holding it super close to the chest as like a dunk on Turk later on for Koi's Hammer. But I'm glad that you did it. You deserve it. Okay. You deserve that very much. So I think that regardless of how or where, these stories are happening physically, thematically, Yogacara having a connection to the mind stream, which is a word used very often in that particular school of thought, is meant to be representative of Cloud's struggle. And it feels like, because this is a big game, there's been a ton of buildup, that the entirety of Cloud's mind sequence, although it might get recreated exactly faithfully, I think will also include this big, long additional amount of payoff. And I think all of this is meant to kind of lend to that. So I think at a very surface level, that's the thematic connection.
Totally agree. Agree. So just to give an example of what you're talking about, and the OG, because I do totally agree. I actually think we'll end up in a situation where the quote-unquote live stream sequence is going to be its own chapter in part 3, where we end up in a situation which is kind of like the trials from chapter 13 in Rebirth, where Cloud is sort of passing through different points of his life with or without Tifa. And I think there'll be I actually think this, because the big twist obviously in the original game is using that sequence to piece together Cloud's mind in such a way that he uses the existence of Zack as the catalyst for coming to terms with his own individuality and his identity. But obviously we've already seen that happen to an extent within Rebirth, so I actually think what they're going to do is twist it in such a way that accepting the death of Aerith is going to be the catalyst for that, and obviously then realizing that he wasn't actually the soldier. But just to go back to the Jungian psychology, so the big part of this in terms of how can you better yourself, how can you be as whole as you possibly can, and it's all about accepting the different parts of your psychology. So accepting the shadow, embracing the shadow, accepting the collective unconscious, embracing the parts that you have no control over. But we see this like very, very, very specifically. We see this with the live stream sequence in Final Fantasy VII, and there's a lot of crossover with Xenogears. Xenogears plays really heavily into a variety of psychologies, and it was sort of developed simultaneous to Final Fantasy VII. Nomura, actually, before he even joined the Final Fantasy VII team, he was part of the Xenogears team. And Sakaguchi just said, no, sorry, get back over. And he worked very closely kind of in previous games with, I believe it's Takahashi is the creator of Xenogears. So like to the point where Takahashi was Nomura's mentor. So Sakaguchi being the producer of both games, or executive producer of both games, Nomura being a mentee of Takahashi, there is almost certainly crossover of ideas there, because Xenogears itself was originally pitched as Final Fantasy VII,
Correct,
and as you've
yeah.
touched on, it's acknowledged within Final Fantasy VII itself that the lyrics to the theme song is what Cloud says when he's in the Mako poisoned wheelchair. Anyway, without digressing any further, Jung teaches us that within the collective unconscious, it's quite often the fact, or he kind of took inspiration from yin and yang on this one. So if you imagine the yin and yang symbol, where we've got one round circle. In fact, I'll actually just draw it with my funny wee sketch.
More drawing, let's go.
Your anima.
You're talking about the development of yourself in archetypal Jungianism.
Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So the 4 stages. First stage is Eve.
Right.
Eve, in the context of the Book of Genesis, is directly associated with the apple. Second stage is Helen, named after Helen of Troy, who is the prisoner within the most famous epic ancient poem in the world. Third stage is Mary, named after the Virgin Mary. The fourth stage is Sophia. Minerva, like Athena, is the Roman goddess of wisdom. The actual word for wisdom in Greek, and the goddess of wisdom in Gnosticism is Sophia.
Interesting.
So we now have a situation where all 4 stages of the collective unconscious are directly linked to Lovelace in Genesis, which then means when you introduce Lovelace and Rebirth and everything that goes along with that, we have some pretty funky theories that we can dance around with.
There's a lot to play. There's a lot at play with. I'm pretty impressed with Lovelace in chapter 12 and how they were able to connect so many bits of source lore and jumble them together in something that was as coherent as it was, for sure.
What did you make of Guardia? Did you see that as a reference to ancient Cetran civilization, or is that the counterpart of Alexander? What was your takeaway from that?
I think it's the city that I think is the capital of Cetran civilization. Yeah, and I think it was probably I think it probably is geographically in the space that became Midgar. Was my read on it.
Yeah.
But we see that clock later in the Temple of the Ancients. All of that stuff seemed to match the technology level and aesthetic of Temple of the Ancients. It's the same not cloud blonde dude.
Yeah.
Being with Jesse, and then the wings, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So the idea of, it's always something that we've played around with, but didn't really have anything to support it before now, until we saw the Cetran story about Genova turning into the goddess and completely flipping what Lovelace might represent on its head. Like, that's blown me away big time. Do you know what I mean? Or should I explain that for chat?
Explain that for chat.
Okay, so in chapter 13 of Rebirth, when you're moving through the Temple of the Ancients and you are having the Cetra recite the history of humans coming after the Cetra and the war between them, and then given the idea that uh, the humans had perhaps been not brainwashed, what's the word I'm looking for? Effectively manipulated by Genova's power. But as part of this story, you get to see um, the actual Genova, which we later fight, uh, being attacked by what seems to be humans and kind of looking like the figures from Loveless. But right at the very end, when the story goes on to say that Genova decided to go into slumber, the hologram transitions from the Genova monster into the winged goddess that Jessie is playing at the start of Loveless. Which, because it then sets up this scenario that Loveless is actually a myth that has been turned on its head. That was effectively a Cetran myth, about, or a kind of warning against the calamity from the skies. But now the big twist is, well, you know, effectively what happens in all across history, that the myths evolve, it changes, you know,
Right.
you know, from culture to culture until it's basically just a bastardized version of the original. But
Sure.
in this particular instance, the version has turned it on its head, where we're no longer talking about the calamity from the skies, we're talking about the goddess descending from the heavens with wings of light and black, light and darkness, which then of course plays into, you know, Crisis Core and the Angeal and Genesis and Sephiroth wings. But yeah, really, really, really fascinating stuff. I think they've played a blinder on this.
There's a lot to unpack with the Cetra just from the little we got.
Yeah.
And we got a lot more than surface level too.
Yeah.
Did
you have any thoughts about in the hologram room where Genova appears, that the armies charging towards her seem to come out from a very specific place in the wall, and on the wall was a figure? You know, it could be Minerva, it could be the Emerald Witch, it could, you know, I'm still trying to piece together what my thoughts are on that.
Yeah, the Emerald Witch seems to be related to the Cetra, according to the Ultimania. And I mean, visually it looks, you know, Cetran. The staff that she has looks like has the same shape as but only wooden, as the staff that Rosa has in Loveless Play. You know, there's definitely iconography. The way that Vincent talks about it makes it seem like has some connection to Lucrezia, but it's very, you know, transitional. And the Ultimania basically came out and said, yeah, this means this means that. And so I do think that in conjunction with what the Guy said about the Cetra and Aerith, I do think that, you know, the purity of the Cetra will probably get developed out, and we'll see them less as, you know, we'll see them as just like every other force in the entirety of this world system, as something that's kind of morally gray. But Delta Sin says it's very clearly Minerva. I'll admit that's my read too. And the Emerald Witch is like so green, you know, in color, that it seems to not be Minerva. So I feel like there's this whole set of characters in Cetran lore that have been given little like hints to explore later. and I don't know if they ever will, or if they're just giving themselves room to do so, which is a thing that Nojima likes to do. But yeah, I think there's a lot to the Cetra and Genova and that war, and I hope that we get to. I hope they have room for that somewhere in part 3, which I don't know where they'll fit it in. Part 3 is already looking to be massive, but yeah. So okay. Well, do you have any questions for me?
I've asked most along the way.
Okay.
I do want to know specifically what your favorite moment in the game was.
It's changed a couple times. It's hard for me to not just say that the entire period of time from Cloud getting inhabited by Sephiroth and Gongaga to essentially the end of the chapter 9, as like the best part of the game for me. Like I liked the live streams. The first portion of the live stream sequence was really, the music was transcendent. It was our first sort of look at the relationship that the White Whispers. That was our first look at the White Whispers, and the fact that they're helping the weapons and that they saved Tifa. Like, it immediately made me connect because of the visual language of Aerith being the last one to reach for Tifa in the white space, and then the White Whispers being there. That what they were doing is really recognizing that Tifa was essential to Aerith's plan for Cloud's salvation. That was the way that I read that. I read that so strongly, with so little like need to like read into things, that I started to tear up when I saw it. I was like, that's what that means. Like, I just, with every part of my body, I felt that was the meaning of that, and to the point where I've like kind of needed to check myself and say, hey, did I just have this really strong feeling, or was that what was really being conveyed? And you know, I'm still kind of leaning that that's about 90% for sure what's going on. But then it was like we'd been seeing little bits of like Cloud's real self kind of peeking out up to that point. Like we saw him being kind of cheerful and almost uncomfortable and awkward in the way that he was smiling when he like beat Dio at the thing, you know, at the weird virtual 3D brawler thing, which you'll notice, by the way, they have no controllers. You know, when they are elevated and they're doing the virtual they're just looking. So that is canonical proof that every human in the world of Final Fantasy VII has the ability to use Inspire. Just so you guys know. Anyway, so his reaction after that was cheerful and glib, and then the little bit of connection he gets to have with Barrett after the mostly ruined dying scene, where he's like, I'm here for you, and I mean that. Like that was so genuine and authentic. Like one of those times we get to see the real Cloud, and then for us to see like the broken Cloud, you know, after he realizes what's happened, and then see him like just woefully apologetic with Tifa in that really raw way, was kind of like, it's kind of what I'm in this for. Is I really like Cloud's journey as the crux of this story, and so I really got to see that. And so I think in terms of execution, every element of that is flawless. However, I have now watched the end of chapter 13 to the end of 14 so much that that's my favorite part of the game. Like, it just, I have the most overall feelings for there. I have more criticisms of it, but the net positive of my experience exploring that space of the narrative is so high that it's the thing that I now associate the most with
Yeah.
with Rebirth. How about you? What is your favorite?
I've a few. Obviously, we've covered the mythology stuff.
Mhm.
All of the Norse mythology moments in particular just had me grinning from ear to ear. Um, I really, really, really loved Kate Sith in the game. Now, obviously, as you know, I kind of met Paul Tinto, the voice actor, a week or so before the game released. So, and we really hit it off. Paul's obviously Scottish as well. So I'm kind of biased in that front, the same way that I was really biased towards Barrett in the first game because I'd only recently met John Eric Bentley. Um, but I think Paul has just knocked it out of the park, and I couldn't believe how much screen time Kate Sith had as well, by comparison to the OG.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I thought they did so well with the character. My I really quite enjoyed Cosmo Canyon as well. There's a few didn't really like what they did with Bugenhagen, but I can understand why they did it. I think they're
Sure.
setting up, the sort of character progression there. Um, I think there were so many moments that brought a tear to my eye, just of just pure nostalgia.
Yeah.
But the only one that brought a tear to my eye in terms of raw emotion was the trials. So I would probably say that the trials are my favourite part. Kind of the Yuffie one actually started me off because I don't know if I mean I guess you would have spotted, but when you're climbing around in the frames, every time you trigger one of the ghost sequences with Sonon, it's a pinwheel. And the pinwheel is representative in intermission of his sister Melfi, but in a more general sense, it's actually it's another. It's to do with kind of Japanese culture, and the pinwheel's kind of representative of sort of death, and particularly the passing of a child. So there's a real. Uh, it's indicative of Yuffie losing her innocence in that way. So of all the objects they could have
Sure.
used to, it was really powerful. It caught me off guard and got that sort of put me in an emotional state, and then the entire sequence with Barrett just
Oh,
floored me.
I know. Barrett
That was
followed by, oh my god,
yeah,
by Aerith, Child Aerith.
that was
Holy
that was
shit.
tough. So easily there. I also agree with you that I think the ending. I totally get why people are upset with it, particularly
Sure.
if they were leaning one way or the other.
Yeah.
Absolutely get it. But I, my initial, I did also feel confused. Wasn't really sure what was going on, and when I sat back and processed it, exactly as Nomura said, like I lost my grandmother last year, and my reaction to that ever since, like I'll have wee pockets of time where it hits me and I'll get a little bit upset, but I still haven't processed that.
Yeah.
So I'm not even denial. It just hasn't registered, and I think having experienced that personally, to then look at what Cloud is basically just not. He's not even recognizing that
Mhm.
Aerith's died. And that is a very, very, very accurate depiction of a response to death. That I've experienced. So I totally agree that it's a masterful way to capture that emotion.
Mhm.
And I think it requires watching everything 2 or 3 times and understanding where they've gone with it to appreciate it.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm sure there was something else I wanted to say, and it's gone. Oh yeah, so the patch that changed the end of remake. Could Aerith see the crack in the sky or the rift in the sky before it or after it?
after?
Okay. I'm not sure. And the reason I'm not sure is that the obvious answer is that it's not. When she looks, and she says, the sky, I don't like it, or whatever, it is indicative of, okay, she can now see that the rift is there. That is what at first sight might be it. But if you go back to Crisis Core, when she actually starts talking to Zack about the sky, before the singularity, before the change, she talks about being afraid of the sky.
Sure. So,
using that principle, it could actually be that the sky that Aerith sees is, if she's access to memories from the future, perhaps like Cloud, she's seeing multiple worlds at the same time. So, post-singularity, when the memories have been taken out of the white live stream, she could no longer see that part of the sky. So it's actually on its head that she doesn't have memories of the future. She everything's totally changed, and one of the things that's changed is she no longer sees the rift in the sky. Just throwing that out there.
That's very interesting. I am going to consider that. That's pretty smart. That's a sharp connection. Wow. Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on the names of Genova? And both Remake and Rebirth?
Well, it's still Genova Life in Japanese.
Okay.
So, I don't know about Life Clinger being a big important thing. I think the localizers are getting a little wild with that. I don't know and Turquoise is in chat too, and he missed the thing. I'm sorry you missed the thing. We'll go back. Yeah, and so I like the localization names from like a just stylistic thing, and I also think Genova Emergent has the best version of the Genova song in forever. It's really, really good. But I don't know about the names. I think that if I'm gonna be honest, one of the things that I was a little maybe let down by was the lack of real clear Genova lore in this one. I thought that we would get a little bit more of like a graduated lore dump about like the nature of the species, and instead we all get it through Sephiroth, who now like interchangeably uses Ore and Watashi, but I do get the sense that we're gonna probably get more information in part 3, and that what they instead did was use some of the space to explain the Gi. And I am curious if there's a connection between the Gi and Genova. Like some of the Gi statues look real Genova-y, in terms of like, well, exactly, at least with the skeletal Genova.
My headcanon has always been that the Temple of the Ancients in the original game was actually depicting, the reason that the temple was the black materia was that the mural room already depicted something that had happened in the past, because it seems to have been, or the mural itself is almost like Egyptian style images. So it was like a prior civilization to the civilization that built the Temple of the Ancients. So I'd always had it in my head that the black materia had been used once before to use a meteor to strike the planet.
Hmm.
It was, identified that, okay, we need to hide the black materia to stop that happening again. Tell the story of it in the mural room as to why this is a bad idea, and then just hide it away. And that the meteor itself that had collided with the planet was the one Genova was on. So it always kind of sat really nice with me. It's obviously not confirmed anywhere that that's the case. But the same mural appears in the room where you fight Demon Gate. Or Demon's Gate.
Or Demon Gates.
And that's Demon Gates, yeah. Which is immediately after the Gi part of the Temple of the Ancients. So I wonder if the Genova element of it is they had a failed attempt of using the black materia already before the Cetra stole it away. So I mean, but again, that's all speculative. Oh Christ, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, so going back to the names, now that you've burst that bubble with Genova Life, it's kind of the reverse of what happened in Remake, where we got Dreamweaver, but the original Japanese was Pulse or Heartbeat.
Beat.
Was Beat, but the music was Genova Quickening, and quickening is specifically a medical term for when a woman feels a baby move inside her for the first time, which is pre-birth. Now, obviously, in the original game, we get Genova Life, or Genova Birth, Genova Life, Genova Death. So the one we got in Remake was a pre-birth medical term, or heartbeat. Genova Emergent. Emergent is a term where it doesn't apply to mammals, but it's when insects or other such creatures are breaking out of their shell. So it's then the halfway stage between birth and life. The same way that Life Clinger is the halfway stage between life and death. So my thinking was, that's really odd that the names that they've got are the in-between stages of the names from the original game. But obviously it doesn't apply now that you've dropped me down. Or Turk has shot me down, whoever translated that particular aspect. But yeah, I can't. So I guess the only other question I've got is, who or what is Aerith at the end of the game? The CG at the end?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's Genova. I think that the nature of her is that could be, I think, pretty successfully argued as either Lifestream Aerith, and to me Lifestream Aerith is the one with the memories closest to the future, the one that we talked to in the resolution scene in Remake. It's the one that hands Cloud the white materia. It's the one that's that's controlling the White Whispers and trying to set up Tifa to help save Cloud's soul, and the one that will ultimately prevent us from having to sacrifice Cloud in order to defeat Sephiroth.
I also think it's the one that fights with you at the end of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. The one that Sephiroth underestimated. I fully agree. I think that's who it is. There's things about it that the nature of her, you could make arguments from. Particularly the thing about Yogacara that's interesting is that the way that it conceptualizes reality through consciousness is that it's very incompatible with, like, if you actually understand it and don't just look at like a Google summary, is that it is very incompatible with "it's all a dream." It instead has more to do with the ability for willpower and consciousness to actualize reality. it's much more. It would be much more like a close-ish Western equivalent would be the Nietzschean idea of Zerwildermacht, the will to power, and sort of. But it also it separates cognition as an entity and as an object. So to me, you could make arguments from Yogacara that indicate that Cloud's intention to save Aerith made her real in an alternate world, and that what Cloud is effectively doing is altering the collective unconscious of the world to eventually make her real. That's an argument that could be made. I don't foresee the story.
I do think the war between Wutai and Shinra is going to play a big role, and it's probably what's going to draw the weapons for a large part. I think, but I'm really excited to see where it goes. I've not thought too much about exactly how it's going to play out, other than, obviously Rufus is going to be at the thick of it, playing both sides. But yeah, I do expect a chapter or two to be set in Wutai, and really deliver on what they've built up, because I do think it's fascinating.
I think there's potential. I don't want to be all negative. There's definitely potential. Okay, next question here. What did we think of the church scene where Aerith pushes Cloud and Sephiroth shows up behind? Found it absolutely gut-wrenching. I think it's one of the best scenes in the game. Easy.
Yeah, it's pretty special. I go right back to my theory of it actually being a physical world. I think that's where it closes the loop on the Aerith that was saved is then killed by Sephiroth, passes the white materia, and then it just circles back and circles back and circles back, which makes it even more gut-wrenching, that idea. But yeah, the whole sequence at the start of chapter 14 is just wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
You're making my mind spin. What if...
That's how a loop works.
What if... Oh my god. So let's say it's... I think that my only issue with this is how often time is described as not really making sense in the interlude worlds. But I was thinking that what if when we're seeing Tifa and Red and Barrett being airlifted out of the chopper, that what's really happened is that's the return to Midgar chronologically. Okay, I've got to think about that. You fucked me up, Mo. Jesus Christ. Okay.
Do you mean the original Katase ending where all the parachutes fail to open? Is that?
Yeah. Like in the world where Aerith lives, we kind of get the Katase ending. Or in the continuity where Aerith lives, the reason they're back at Midgar, the reason the world's screwed up. But then again, Meteor's never summoned, but why would it be? Aerith lived. Okay. I need to think about that more. I'm still... I think there's too many indicators about the world that make that not so. But I'll come back to that. Thank you for fucking me up with that.
Sure.
So in the ending, when Sephiroth first appears before Forgotten Capital, he summons Lifestream that turns red and then black in the beginning of AC. We also see Lifestream turn red when Marlene is describing what Shinra did, and it looks the same. What do you think this effect means? I think we're just delving into the concept of negative Lifestream, and I think this is actually really well described outside of like the mainline titles. It's shown in AC, but it's described really well in like the commentary interview by Nomura or Advent Children, where it describes what he's doing, and it's negative Lifestream. It's also really kind of clearly described in On the Way to a Smile as that despair is sort of the food and mechanism by which Sephiroth and by extension Genova corrupt the Lifestream. It also matches the explanation Sephiroth is giving while he's taunting Cloud about Aerith's death, is all of this, I've never felt it so keenly. And then you see, in Unreal Engine, what Lifestream's conversion to negative Lifestream looks like. And it's got a similar chromatic effect. Outside of the Forgotten Capital, that is a visual works thing, so if there's any discrepancy between the way that some of the effects look, I would chalk it up more to that, because the essence of it is the same. We're seeing Sephiroth convert Lifestream into negative Lifestream. That's the way that I do. You agree?
I do agree.
Okay.
I think I could take it one step further,
Okay.
in that Sephiroth doesn't know to do this until after Meteor has been stopped at the end of the old game, and obviously he's in the Lifestream during On the Way to a Smile. The Lifestream has carried the parts of Genova across the world. Geostigma has arisen, so the despair that's within the spirit energy that's returning to the Lifestream is how Sephiroth first identifies that despair and anger and hatred can be used to corrupt the Lifestream. We also, we've kind of pitched the idea that the Sephiroth in the Singularity is post-Advent Children Sephiroth, so he already has this knowledge. But we're then putting Sephiroth with this knowledge into a pre-Geostigma environment. So he then has to find a way to use the same principles of converting or using despair and hatred to convert the Lifestream, but do it on a bigger scale. And I think the way that he's doing that is by using the end of the worlds, the end of the sort of non-main timeline worlds. So whatever Lifestream is present there that's already filled with despair and anger, that's then filtering through. So he's the convergence of worlds is basically replacing Geostigma in terms of where he's getting access to this despair. I think that's what he's using.
I love it. I love that. Okay. One of my favorite new users, followers, subscribers, I'm a fucking legend, who, man, I hope we see more content from him, because he's really made some interesting observations. But he asks this, he says, Jung, Yogacara, Tree of Life, and the Philosophical Tree paired with flash forwards in Remake. How likely do you think it is we are experiencing the re-trilogy through Cloud's Lifestream sequence? I am going to say pretty unlikely. Not on a mechanical level. I think there's elements of the Lifestream sequence or Cloud's mind having meta connections and reverberations throughout the rest of the plot But I think the main reason it's unlikely is that Square Enix, shockingly, like I know sometimes it doesn't feel this way, does do market testing. And I promise that that idea is just a touch too experimental. And people don't like it was all a dream stuff. I think that would get the most viscerally negative reactions, from a lot of the purists people, even more so than like a Zach becomes the new protagonist. I don't personally feel that way. I don't hate this, and I do think that there's like a lot of mechanics at play here, which do indicate that Cloud's psyche and his consciousness are important to how the narrative will unfold at a level that might even make it ultimately deviate from the original. I do think those are possibilities, and I do think that all of the things that you're referencing from Jung, the Yogacara, from Tree of Life, and the philosophical tree, all of those mechanics that you are drawing this conclusion from are important places to look, like more important places to look than almost anywhere else to kind of interpret this project from. But I think in a literal sense, I can't see them doing that. I think that's it would just be too risky for them to do. Even, that's my take. What do you think?
No, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. The only potential counterpoint would be that Cloud is obviously shown on a handful of occasions of kind of being able to access another world when he falls asleep, but I don't think that's a memory issue. I think that's closer to what we spoke about earlier about his untapped potential, his limitless power that Chadley makes reference to. That I don't think it's a coincidence that kind of with everything that Cloud has been involved in over the course of Rebirth, that he does have glimpses of other worlds, and that will probably be important at some point, but not in the context of it being a memory. I agree with Baby Seal on this one. I think that's unnecessarily complex and would probably go down badly.
Okay, and I agree, but I like so much of like the mechanics of that. Like I can't stress that enough, that I think there's something really there in terms of the connections that are being made, because like at the beginning of this, one of the things that I mentioned about these two schools of thought is that they are such broad views of the entire of both society and like the nature of the world, that to say that they influence a story it could be universally said. Like you could take Cinderella and say it applies to these things, because of how wide. But the specific points you're connecting to, it's happening in the live stream sequence. The specific mechanics are the ones that, in my heart, I feel Nojima is working with when he talks about them, because they have the most thematic connections to things already established in the lore. Delta Sin makes a really, really terrifying connection to Dirge's opening. It says Dirge's opening has bodies being loaded into helicopters from Sector 2. And that is true. That is true. So yeah, I'll have to think about that a little bit. We are out of time, and so if you could just say some closing thoughts. What are your closing thoughts for the folks over at YouTube?
My closing thought is that Rebirth has been the greatest experience I've ever had in terms of media. It's obviously not absolutely perfect. There are a few things that were a little bit off for me personally. But it is as close to perfect as I didn't even dream was possible. You know, it's so far beyond my wildest imagination that here we are. You know what, 6-7 weeks down the lane, and I still don't believe it's real. It's a remarkable achievement. I loved every second of it. I would recommend it to anyone. I think we have a few years ahead of us of theory crafting on this. I look forward to hearing what everyone else has to say about it. You know, if they've liked my ideas, if they haven't liked my ideas, you know, what they're looking forward to hearing about. You know, yeah, I have so much to work with on this. I think it's an almost certainty that I'll need to release an updated version of the Norse Myths book now.
You have to, and I can't wait.
So there's so much that I can play around with. I'm working on
a remake.
Rebirth edition. So in addition to that, I'm working on a Trojan War book as well that deals mainly with Crisis Core. So I'm really excited about that. And yeah, I would ask that anyone who's interested in what I've got to say to check out my social media, to check out the video series, the Rebirth video series that I'm doing for KuppleCon. And yeah, please just reach out. I love to chat about this stuff. I'm so grateful for having the opportunity to come on the show and finally get all of this off my chest. You know, there is no place that I would rather have had this discussion. So I love you, man, and thank you for having me.
I love you too, Mo, dearly. One of the best friends I've ever had. Easy, and it's all thanks to Final Fantasy VII. You know.
There you go.
So thank you,
we
YouTube.
are literally friends we made along the way.
Absolutely, we are the live stream sword. Thank you, YouTube, for being here, and toodaloos, guys.
Take care. See you later.